Hello, everybody, and welcome to the United Safety Technologies podcast. Here we discuss real safety and not the retributive iron fist safety. We discuss how safety programs should function versus the rule-based, officer-enforced program, where managers demand obedience. Here you will learn the human element of safety and how to motivate your employees by involving them. It's been a while. Sorry, I have a lot going on. Grad school, work, now operating my own business, like 100% of the time now. So it looks like the 2016 Bureau of Labor Statistics are out, and it doesn't look good. Fatal injuries are up, and once again, transportation rules the list as leaders.
You are listening to the United Safety Technologies podcast, where we talk about safety, human factors, and preventing errors that lead to accidents. Now your guest, John Faluca.
Truck drivers are dying. What's going on? Are cell phones the cause? Is the problem sharing the road with distracted drivers? Are truck drivers on the phone? Maybe a little both? I see truck drivers on the phone as well. Ever see what a cell phone does to the dopamine release in the brain? A person likes us on Facebook, or they like something that we say, or anything. They give us any attention. Or when we get a look or a wink on the latest dating site, we just can't seem to put the phone down. The National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration, the NHTSA, states that 3,477 lives were lost in 2015. And 391,000 were injured in motor vehicle crashes involving distracted driving. What is distracted driving? You may ask. That's eating, talking, stereo adjustment, working on the navigation system, texting. Texting is the worst. Taking your eyes off the road for 5 seconds at 55 miles an hour is the equivalent to driving 100 yards blindly. Put a blindfold on and drive at 55 for 100 yards. That's suicide. The paper adds, the NHTSA, the paper adds that during daylight hours, approximately 660,000 drivers are using their cell phones while driving. They continue, and once again, this is a headline. NHTSA is dedicated to eliminating risky behaviors for a safer road. And how are they eliminating risky behavior? Education and, you guessed it, enforcement. That's right. Once again, enforcement. Will enforcement work? Does enforcement work? That's today's question. So check this out. This is social norms in action. I'm going to go over to this paper that Health.Arizona EDU puts out. And it's the University of Arizona really wanting to make an impact on student alcohol consumption. The school addresses the problem, and they make alcohol consumption not cool. Think about it. Think about a young male population. If females thought it was stupid and unattractive to drink alcohol, how do you think young males would respond to this norm? Social norms work in preventing accidents. If the U of A can lower alcohol consumption on a campus of thousands of college kids, then social norms will work anywhere. So let's go over this. The heading is Alcohol Trends at the University of Arizona. And here's the introduction. It says, high-risk alcohol use among UA students is declining. Students are employing more strategies to reduce alcohol consumption and alcohol-related harm. UA Campus Health Services comprehensive approach reaches individual students, high-risk groups, and the campus community at large. The next bullet says, UA Campus Health has been collecting data and leading innovative programs for over 20 years. Progress is being made at the UA around student alcohol use, but challenges still remain. So you're looking at a poster here, and here's a little bit of background. The University of Arizona, UA, Campus Health Services has led innovative programs, policies, and strategies addressing high risk and underage alcohol use for over 20 years. Our work has been recognized as a model program by U.S. Department of Education. Additionally, our challenging college alcohol abuse program is listed on the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices. Based on their distinction, we frequently offer training and technical assistance for campuses across the country. Student alcohol use is a complex problem that demands a comprehensive approach. Kind of like safety. A comprehensive approach that reaches individual students, high-risk groups, and the campus community at large. Inside the summary, you'll find information and data points on the programs and initiatives that are having a sustained impact on important student health issue. So, here they address the problem. But then they kind of show you pictures of their posters. And they develop these posters to mimic the study that they did. It says 91% of UA students do not drive while under the influence of alcohol. Now, think about how they worded that. It says 91%. So a majority of the population at U of A or UA is not driving under the influence. Then they say 89% arrange to have a plan to drink. If you drink, have a plan. So they're basically saying, you can't do this. If you do, we're going to throw you out of school. And they're not saying, if you guys are caught drinking, we're going to send the campus police after you and have you arrested. They're not saying that. They're saying, if you're going to drink, do something about it like everybody else on the campus is. 89% or 91% of our students don't drink and drive. What that does is it causes a person to think that if they do that, they're not going to be like most of the people. Like I've always said, people want to be included. People really don't like being outsiders. And if they're trying to be an outsider, they're trying to be included into another group that would accept them. So people really want to be accepted. Then they have a separate poster. 61% of UA students have 3 or less drinks per week. So look at that number. They're not saying that 39% students they're not saying have more drinks, have at least 3 or more drinks a week. They're not saying that. They're engaging the positive side of the statistics. 61% of students have 3 or less drinks per week. So they understand the reality of students drinking, but they're just telling everybody, hey, most of the people on campus don't drink as much as you think. That's what they think. They think if they're doing it, everybody else is. Come on, take it. Everybody else is. Remember that? So they're making progress. So data from UA Campus Health Services Annual Health and Wellness Survey provides an ideal snapshot showing the changes in student alcohol use over time. So here's their all-time high in 2015. Students who did not have alcohol in the past 30 days. In 2005, it was 32%. In 2015, it was 42%, since they engaged this program. Percent of students who usually party less than one time a week. 56% in 2007, first time asked in current format. Now it's 71% in 2015. Alternate with alcohol beverages. So they're drinking something other than alcohol. That was only 43% in 2005. Now it's 58% in 2015. Now, you see how I said before, when I read that to you, I said only 43%. So I'm shining a negative light on that, which causes you, I'm priming you to think negatively about that 43%. Next bullet point, refuses to ride with a driver who's been drinking. So in 2005, that was 85%. Now in 2015, well, it's 2 years ago, it's 91%. All-time lows in 2015. Average drinks per week. 2005, it was 5.4. Now, well, in 2015, 3.8. Average drinks per week among drinkers. So they're at a party. 7 drinks in 2005. 5 drinks in 2015. Frequent heavy episodic drinking 3 times in the past 2 weeks. 32% in 2005 and 23% in 2015. So that shows a decrease in frequent heavy episodic drinking. Drinking last time partied, lowest since 2005. 4.5 drinks in 2005 rose to 5.1 drinks in 2008 and gradually declined to 4.5 in 2015. Drove after drinking any amount of alcohol, past 30 days and past year. They reported past 30 days, 25% in 2005, 11% in 2015. Past year, 37% in 2005, 20% in 2015. Drove while under the influence. Past year, 33% in 2015 and 15% in 2015. Passed out during drinking alcohol in the past 30 days. 2005, there was 35%. And in 2015, 22%. Percentage of students who usually party 2 or more times a week. 28% in 2007 and 14% in 2015. And they did this by using social norms. Now, they didn't just hang posters, but they're just showing you what they did, because this is a pretty famous study. What they did at U of A is they utilized social norms to reduce the alcohol consumption among students. Now there's a chart here. Percentage reporting heavy episodic drinking 2 times per week. This goes from 2005 to 2015. So what this is the frequent heavy episodic drinking, i.e. consuming 5 or more drinks in one sitting, 2 or more times in the past 2 weeks, often referred to as binge drinking, has also decreased over time, 27%. This is a positive shift due to risk associated with this level of drinking. So in 2005, binge drinking was at 31.6%. And then in 2007, it takes a click up to 38.9%. And then ultimately in 2015, 23.2%. Now, these numbers aren't saying 0, but they're on their way to 0. It's better than their law enforcement compliant, retributive, I'll lock you up, write you a ticket safety rule, or their rules. Then they demonstrate another poster. For a good time, drink less. So it shows the finger, giving you a thumb up like on Facebook or social media. If you want more fun, a better buzz, a night you can remember, to be more likable, drink less and fewer, so it gives you thumbs down. Hangovers, blackouts, regrets, empty calories, nights getting sick. So they understand that the attempt in drinking is to get that buzz. It's alcohol abuse. Or it says that also gives you a choice. Don't drink at all. 37% of UA students don't drink or didn't drink in the past 30 days. 60% have 4 or fewer than when they party. So what they're doing is they're showing the positive. They're showing the populations that are doing the positive and not focusing on the negative, like safety professionals do. When they're talking about safety, they're talking about the negative in safety. Then he goes on, another statistic, average number of drinks. It shows a little historical chart from 2005 to 2015. The average number of drinks that UA students report consuming in a week has decreased by 30% since 2005. 2005, it was at 5.4, and 2015, it was at 3.8. So they're definitely making an impact here. And all they're doing is using social norms. So here at the bottom of this next poster, it says, since 1994, UA Campus Health has used social norms messaging as seen in the poster above to correct the students' misperceptions about alcohol use among their peers. They're showing them because everybody thinks that every college kid is getting stoned and getting blasted in college. Everybody thinks that it's one big party. Now they're showing them, well, that's a fallacy. That's not true. This is the act. These are the numbers. If you do it, you're going to be like the less popular people. That's what U of A is doing. We're seeing the impact that that's making. They're encouraging in one of their posters, stay in the sweet spot. Stop the buzz. You only miss out on these regrets, hangovers, blackouts. So they're making all the negative stuff. They're telling you that this is the negative side of drinking so much. 1 to 3 drinks. If when you party, blood alcohol of 0.05 or less, that's the blood alcohol content. So they're taking reality, they're taking the problem, and they're addressing it. Then they also give people a guide. They give them a guide per body weight and time drinking. And then they give a little equivalent of one drink, what one drink is, 12 ounces of beer, 4 to 5 ounces of wine, and 1 ounce of liquor. And they give an example. A 160-pound man who has 4.8 drinks in less than 4 hours is safer. So they give them these little wallet-sized cards given to students by their campus health to estimate how many drinks are recommended to stay in the safer blood alcohol content range based on the weight and time spent drinking. They give one to men, they give one to women. So there is a great example of how social norms work. If the U of A can lower the alcohol consumption on a campus of thousands of college kids, then social norms will work anywhere. I've said that before. So as we see in the last news release, the Department of Labor Statistics, we see that rules and regulations fail us. And what is OSHA going to do about it? The same old thing. More enforcement. Did you know OSHA has approximately 800 CSHOs throughout the country? It's reported that it would take OSHA inspectors 159 years to make a second visit to employer sites. And how the hell would a CSHO inspect a truck driver? Are they going to start making traffic stops now? I guess they can make checks at the terminal. I shouldn't pick on them too much. They're doing the best they can with what they know. More enforcement. Let's go over the news release, Bureau of Labor and Statistics. This was released at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Tuesday, December 19th, 2017. There were a total of 5,190 fatal work injuries recorded in the United States in 2016, a 7% increase from the 4,836 fatal injuries reported in 2015. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported today, that was on the 9th. This is the third consecutive increase in annual workplace fatalities and the first time more than 5,000 fatalities have been recorded by the census since 2008. The fatal injury rate increased 3.6 per 100,000 full-time equivalent workers, called FTEs, from 3.4 in 2015 to the highest rate since 2010. See Table 1. Let's look at Table 1. Chart 1, number of fatal work injuries by employee status. So you have self-employed and wage and salary people. We won't go over the self-employed. They're considerably smaller. Not to say it doesn't matter, but we just won't go over it. So in 2005, 4,592. And in 2016, 4,098. Which gives, because then you have to add the self-employed, 5,190. So it looks like the self-employed kind of pushed us over the edge there with 1,092 fatalities. Work injuries involving transportation incidents remain the most common fatal event in 2016, accounting for 40%, 2,083. Violence and other injuries by persons or animals increased 23% to become the second most fatal event in 2016. Interesting. Workplace violence, second most. And other events with large changes were exposed to harmful substances or environments, which rose 22%, and fires and explosions, which declined 27%. So we're blowing up less people and things. Chart 2, fatal occupational injuries by major event, 2015 and 2016. So in 2015, transportation incidents, there was 2,054, and in 2016, there was 2,083. Other than violence in the workplace, falls, slips, and trips were up in 2016. Contact with objects and equipment up with 761. Exposure to harmful substances or environments, 518. Now it goes back to fatal work injuries involving violence and other injuries by persons or animals, increased by 163 cases to 866 in 2016. Workplace homicides increased by 83 cases to 500 in 2016. And workplace suicides increased. With all this downsizing and tripling the workload of your employees, that makes sense. I mean, no, I'm not going to go there. So civilian occupations with high fatal work injuries, don't get this confused with, they're just talking now about the dangerous jobs. So don't get that confused with the overall count. Because it shows the logging workers... Once again, logging workers. Let me make sure I'm reading this right. Fatal injury rate, 135.9. That's out of 100,000 full-time equivalent workers. Fisheries and related fishing workers, 86.0. Aircraft pilots, 55.5. Roofers, 48.6. Refuge and recyclable material collectors, 34.1. Structural and steel workers, 25.1. Drivers, sales workers, and truck drivers was 918 with a 24%. I'm sorry, injury rate, 24.7% injury rate. Then they kind of go over the race classifications, whatnot. But what I do want to cover here with you guys is that I remember being in the I remember being back in my tools, the days back when I was in my tools. They had always told us, this is before I got into safety, they had always told us that the people that were most likely going to kill themselves or get hurt were 18 to 19-year-olds and the 20 to 24-year-olds. And then the 25 to 30 is when you kind of get into the journeyman level. But they always said 18, 19, 20, and 24. They're the people who you got to watch out for because they're going to get killed or they're going to hurt themselves. And they'd have a little test on that. What age group is more likely to have a fatality or an injury? And everybody would say, oh, under 24. And they're like, yep, because the brain isn't finished developing till 25. Well, guess what? For the past 20 years, steadily, the most common age group to have a fatality or an injury were the two age groups, 35 to 44 and 45 to 54. in the characteristics part of this report, 18 to 19-year-old, 2015, 50, 2016, 43, 20 to 24, 329, 2016, 310. Now let's skip over to 35 to 45. 35 to 45 was 864, and 2016 was 979. And then 45 to 54. In 2015, 1,130. And in 2016, 1,145. And it has been like that for the last 20 years. Constantly. It's that age group that has the highest fatality rates. And then everybody says, oh, that's because of complacency. I'm not a firm believer in complacency. At least in the construction field. Because everybody puts their PPE on. Nobody wants to go home, or nobody wants to die at work. And what does this tell us also? We have to drive to get to work. If you are in a occupation where you have to wake up, drive to work, and then drive to do your job, not only is your job hazardous, there's hazards that you'll encounter while performing your job. You are in one of the most hazardous occupations, driving around on our nation's freeways. Mom, dad, the kids driving to school. It's probably one of the most hazardous things we can do here in the United States. As soon as you get on the roadway, man, bam, you're in that category. What's wrong here? Why do we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again? It reminds me when I'm trying to work with electronics, the other day I was trying to connect my little speaker, a little block rocker, to the computer. You know the Bluetooth feature on the computer. Now everything has Bluetooth. And when I was doing it, I was not able to get that to connect to the computer. The block rocker would not connect to the computer. What I did, I just kept doing what I knew how to do, and that was the same old process when pairing a device to the computer. Turns out the Bluetooth feature wouldn't work. I turn everything off, I'd reboot the computer, turn off the block rocker. I did this like 16 times in a row. Finally, my wife said, when are you going to learn something else is wrong? What you are doing isn't working. My response is, this is how you connect to Bluetooth. Well, she's right. Something else was wrong. I didn't know what it was. But anyway, we needed a new block rocker. People, I'm here to tell you we need a new way of safety. Or doing safety or something. Let's take a real quick look at safety. Let's say someone gets hurt on the job. What do you do? Now, once again, I'm not saying that rules and regulations are all bad, but just following the rules is not safety. More following the rules is just following the rules. It takes the expert, it takes their input to keep people safe. So what happens? Someone gets hurt. You write a new rule, right? You make it a process or a procedure, your new rule. You implement the program. You educate the masses. And then if somebody violates a new rule, you write up those who don't comply. Think about this. One day, you go out, you're a manager or a safety guy, and a top employee fails to comply. What do? The top producer fails at following your safety rule. What do? He or she makes you the most money. How do you deal with that? Also, I see this happening. We tell our employers we want you to be safe. We even tell them, stop the work if something isn't right. Until that time comes. Then you'll see people will put on a good show, and we correct nothing and we move forward and hope for the best. When someone tries to stop the job, we do everything we can to appease them, which means we're not going to do anything, but we do everything we can to appease them just to keep them from stopping the job, just to keep the process, just to keep productivity going. What's wrong with safety? We don't know what to do. We have managers running safety programs, people that know nothing about people and how they operate. They're running safety programs. That's what we do. We need bigger teeth, is what I heard an OSHA official say. We need more regulation. We need more capacity to fine. And that's kind of like what's happening. You look at the New York Department of Buildings, and if someone's getting killed or hurt, they're now investigating with police officers. They're putting people in jail. They're investigating on-the-job fatalities with the police. That's right. If you're a supervisor, a safety manager, an owner, you can be prosecuted and jailed for a fatality on the job. They're not messing around. But, too bad, there's going to be a lot of people sent to jail because they won't look at safety any differently. It's crazy. Well, enough of me bitching. What do we do? How do we solve the old way of safety? I have some little processes here, or little steps we might be able to follow to get a start. Step number one. Rule number one. Step number one, take safety out of the manager's hands and give safety to the employees. Take the manager out of disciplining the employees that break the rules. Number three, allow employees to recommend the discipline to HR, not the manager. Allow HR to do their job. Too many times have I heard or seen the manager make a knee-jerk reaction and demand people be fired on the spot. Number four, people that don't know people tend to make decisions with their emotions, not their head. Allow your people to design the safety systems, processes, procedures. Why not? They're the experts, not the manager. The rule-based retributive safety system and programs are failing. They're failing us miserably. Now, don't get me wrong, some rules are great and some aren't. Some rules are not well thought out. Some rules will handcuff you. Like I said before in the past, you have a crew or you have this job that needs to be done. You have to check the oil in transformers. I got to use these examples because that's basically all I know. But you have to, some regulation or some regulator says you need to check the oil, the PCB content in the oil. Or you need to make sure these transformers aren't failing. So one of the best ways of checking the health of your transformers is to check to see if it's gassing or whatnot. And you can do that by checking the oil. But sometimes you have to go into a close primary zone where there's primary lethal voltage. And the way linemen prevent themselves from getting hurt is to apply rubber goods. They put rubber blankets using rubber gloves, and they put these blankets over the conductors, switches, or energized parts, and that keeps them isolated. Well, there are companies out there that have a rule. If you're going to apply, that states if you're going to apply rubber goods onto something, onto an energized piece of equipment, you have to have a constituted crew, which is 3 people. Well, to check the oil in these transformers, all you need is 2 guys. That's their rule. That's what they say. So a contractor bids the job for 2 guys. Not 3, but 2. Even has a smaller one-man bucket. Then they get into a situation where they have to get into the primary, the MAD, the minimum approach distance. They have to install rubber goods to keep themselves safe. But they can't because they need an extra guy. So the guy up in the air doing the work cannot protect himself by applying rubber goods because he needs an additional person. That's where a safety rule has handcuffed the worker. First of all, not being safe is socially acceptable. Try this discussion. Try it for yourself. Have a discussion about what your employees did over the weekend. Just ask them to mow the lawn, ask them to talk about what they did that was not safe. As your employees talk about what they did, you'll see people laughing at their actions. I was changing out a ceiling fan, and I didn't turn off the circuit, and I almost killed myself. Or I was mowing the lawn with flip-flops. Or I was on the roof with flip-flops and no fall protection. Or I was doing weed eating with no ear protection, no eye protection. And people laugh. They think that's funny. So let them all go through that evolution. And then when the discussion gets to you and it gets back to you, tell them how you beat your child. Tell them how you beat your wife. Snorted a line of coke and did some meth. Watch the smiles fall from their faces. The smiles falling from their face is a clear indicator that your actions are not popular. But almost killing yourself at home is funny. We need to make unsafety not popular. We need the smiles melting off the faces of coworkers, the same reaction when we talk about being unsafe. It will never happen to me. This is one of the small little constructs I think plagues our work for, plagues us as human beings, and that's optimism bias. Optimism bias is when I think nothing bad will happen to me. However, the bad stuff will happen to you or somebody else. I won't get a divorce, but you will. I'm a great driver and I have not been in a crash for the past 15 years. That's not complacency. It's the idea that because nothing happened to me, it won't. It's the idea that because it looks safe, that it is. Or you hear, I've been a lineman for 25 years, I know better. That's funny about linemen. They know better. I would never do that, they say. Look at the statistics. They're the people who are killing themselves, the veterans in the organization. So, I have a TED Talk here. So we'll listen to a TED Talk about this issue, optimism bias. I think getting this information from a great researcher is very valuable to you. She's far better explaining than me, and she explains it better. This is Tali Sharot. I'm probably butchering her name, sorry. She's a great researcher, and she does a great job explaining this bias.
I'm going to talk to you about optimism, or more precisely, the optimism bias. It's a cognitive illusion that we've been studying in my lab for the past few years, and 80% of us have it. It's our tendency to overestimate our likelihood of experiencing good events in our lives and underestimate our likelihood of experiencing bad events. So we underestimate our likelihood of suffering from cancer, being in a car accident. We overestimate our longevity, our career prospects. In short, we're more optimistic than realistic, but we are oblivious to the fact. Take marriage, for example. In the Western world, divorce rates are about 40%. That means that out of 5 married couples, 2 will end up splitting their assets. But when you ask newlyweds about their own likelihood of divorce, they estimate it at 0%. And even divorce lawyers, who should really know better, hugely underestimate their own likelihood of divorce. So it turns out that optimists are not less likely to divorce, but they are more likely to remarry. In the words of Samuel Johnson, remarriage is a triumph of hope over experience. So if we're married, we're more likely to have kids, and we all think our kids will be especially talented. This, by the way, is my 2-year-old nephew, Guy, and I just want to make it absolutely clear that he's a really bad example of the optimism bias because he is, in fact, uniquely talented. And I'm not alone. Out of 4 British people, 3 said that they were optimistic about the future of their own families. That's 75%. But only 30% said that they thought families in general are doing better than a few generations ago. And this is a really important point because we're optimistic about ourselves, we're optimistic about our kids, we're optimistic about our families, but we're not so optimistic about the guy sitting next to us. And we're somewhat pessimistic about the fate of our fellow citizens and the fate of our country. But private optimism about our own personal future remains persistent. And it doesn't mean that we think things will just magically turn out okay, but rather that we have the unique ability to make it so. Now, I'm a scientist. I do experiments. So to show you what I mean, I'm going to do an experiment here with you. Okay? So I'm going to give you a list of abilities and characteristics. And I want you to think, for each of these abilities, where you stand relative to the rest of the population. The first one is getting along well with others. Who here believes they're at the bottom 25%? Okay, that's about 10 people out of 1,500, I think. Who believes they're at the top 25%? That's most of us here. Okay, now do the same for your driving ability. How interesting are you? How attractive are you? How honest are you? And finally, how modest are you? So most of us put ourselves above average on most of these abilities. Now, this is statistically impossible. We can't all be better than everyone else. But if we believe we're better than the other guy, well, that means that we're more likely to get that promotion, to remain married, because we're more social, more interesting. And it's a global phenomenon. The optimism bias has been observed in many different countries, in Western cultures, in non-Western cultures, in females and males, in kids, in the elderly. It's quite widespread. But the question is it good for us? So some people say no. Some people say the secret to happiness is low expectations. I think the logic goes something like this. If we don't expect greatness, if we don't expect to find love and be healthy and successful, well, we're not going to be disappointed when these things don't happen. And if we're not disappointed when good things don't happen and we're pleasantly surprised when they do, we will be happy. So it's a very good theory, but it turns out to be wrong for 3 reasons. Number 1, whatever happens, whether you succeed or you fail, people with high expectations always feel better. Because how we feel when we get dumped or win Employee of the Month depends on how we interpret that event. The psychologists Margaret Marshall and John Brown studied students with high and low expectations. And they found that when people with high expectations succeed, they attribute that success to their own traits. I'm a genius, therefore I got an A, therefore I'll get an A again and again in the future. When they failed, it wasn't because they were dumb, but because the exam just happened to be unfair. Next time they will do better. People with low expectations did the opposite. So when they failed, it was because they were dumb, and when they succeeded, it was because the exam just happened to be really easy. Next time, reality would catch up with them. So they felt worse. Number 2, regardless of the outcome, the pure act of anticipation makes us happy. The behavioral economist George Lowenstein asked students in his university to imagine getting a passionate kiss from a celebrity, any celebrity. Then he said, how much are you willing to pay to get a kiss from a celebrity if the kiss was delivered immediately, in 3 hours, in 24 hours, in 3 days, in 1 year, in 10 years? He found that the students were willing to pay the most, not to get a kiss immediately, but to get a kiss in 3 days. They were willing to pay extra in order to wait. Now, they weren't willing to wait a year or 10 years. I mean, no one wants an aging celebrity, but 3 days seemed to be the optimum amount. So why is that? Well, if you get the kiss now, it's over and done with. But if you get the kiss in 3 days, well, that's 3 days of jittery anticipation, the thrill of the wait. The students wanted that time to imagine, where is it going to happen? How is it going to happen? Anticipation made them happy. This is, by the way, why people prefer Friday to Sunday. It's a really curious fact, because Friday is a day of work and Sunday is a day of pleasure, so you would assume that people will prefer Sunday, but they don't. It's not because they really, really like being in the office and they can't stand strolling in the park or having a lazy brunch. We know that because when you ask people about their ultimate favorite day of the week, surprise, surprise, Saturday comes in at first, then Friday, then Sunday. People prefer Friday because Friday brings with it the anticipation of the weekend ahead, all the plans that you have. On Sunday, the only thing you can look forward to is a work week. So optimists are people who expect more kisses in their future, more strolls in the park, and that anticipation enhances their well-being. In fact, without the optimism bias, we would all be slightly depressed. People with mild depression, they don't have a bias when they look into the future. They're actually more realistic than people, healthy individuals. But individuals with severe depression, they have a pessimistic bias. So they tend to expect the future to be worse than it ends up being. So optimism changes subjective reality. The way we expect the world to be changes the way we see it. But it also changes objective reality. It acts as a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that is the third reason why lowering your expectations will not make you happy. Controlled experiments have shown that optimism is not only related to success, it leads to success. Optimism leads to success in academia, in sports, and politics. And maybe the most surprising benefit of optimism is health. If we expect the future to be bright, stress and anxiety are reduced. So, all in all, optimism has lots of benefits. But the question that was really confusing to me was, how do we maintain optimism in the face of reality? As a neuroscientist, this was especially confusing because, according to all the theories out there, when your expectations are not met, you should alter them. But this is not what we find. We asked people to come into our lab in order to try and figure out what was going on. We asked them to estimate their likelihood of experiencing different terrible events in their lives. So, for example, what is your likelihood of suffering from cancer? And then we told them the average likelihood of someone like them to suffer these misfortunes. So cancer, for example, is about 30%. And then we asked them again, how likely are you to suffer from cancer? What we wanted to know was whether people will take the information that we gave them to change their beliefs. And indeed, they did. But mostly when the information we gave them was better than what they expected. So, for example, if someone said, my likelihood of suffering from cancer is about 50%, and we said, hey, good news, the average likelihood is only 30%, the next time around they would say, well, maybe my likelihood is about 35%. So they learned quickly and efficiently. But if someone started off saying, my average likelihood of suffering from cancer is about 10%, and we said, hey, bad news, the average likelihood is about 30%, the next time around they would say, yep, still think it's about 11%. So it's not that they didn't learn at all, they did, but much, much less than when we gave them positive information about the future. And it's not that they didn't remember the numbers that we gave them. Everyone remembers that the average likelihood of cancer is about 30%, and the average likelihood of divorce is about 40%, but they didn't think that those numbers were related to them. What this means is that warning signs, such as these, may only have limited impact. Yes, smoking kills, but mostly kills the other guy. What I wanted to know was, what was going on inside the human brain that prevented us from taking these warning signs personally? But at the same time, when we hear that the housing market is hopeful, we think, oh, my house is definitely going to double in price. To try and figure that out, I asked the participants in the experiment to lie in a brain imaging scanner. It looks like this. And using a method called functional MRI, we were able to identify regions in the brain that were responding to positive information. One of these regions is called the left inferior frontal gyrus. So if someone said, my likelihood of suffering from cancer is 50%, and we said, hey, good news, average likelihood is 30%, the left inferior frontal gyrus would respond fiercely. And it didn't matter if you are an extreme optimist, a mild optimist, or slightly pessimistic, everyone's left inferior frontal gyrus was functioning perfectly well, whether you're Barack Obama or Woody Allen. On the other side of the brain, the right inferior frontal gyrus was responding to bad news. And here's the thing. it wasn't doing a very good job. The more optimistic you were, the less likely this region was to respond to unexpected negative information. And if your brain is failing at integrating bad news about the future, you will constantly leave your rose-tinted spectacles on. So we wanted to know, could we change this? Could we alter people's optimism bias by interfering with the brain activity in these regions? And there's a way for us to do that. This is my collaborator, Ryota Kanai, and what he's doing is he's passing a small magnetic pulse through the skull of the participant in our study into their inferior frontal gyrus. And by doing that, he's interfering with the activity of this brain region for about half an hour. After that, everything goes back to normal, I assure you. So let's see what happens. First of all, I'm going to show you the average amount of bias that we see. So if I was to test all of you now, this is the amount that you would learn more from good news relative to bad news. Now we interfere with the region that we found to integrate negative information in this task, and the optimism bias grew even larger. We made people more biased in the way that they process information. Then we interfered with the brain region that we found to integrate good news in this task, and the optimism bias disappeared. We were quite amazed by these results because we were able to eliminate a deep-rooted bias in humans. And at this point, we stopped and we asked ourselves, would we want to shatter the optimism illusion into tiny little bits? If we could do that, would we want to take people's optimism bias away? Well, I've already told you about all of the benefits of the optimism bias, which probably makes you want to hold on to it for dear life. But there are, of course, pitfalls, and it will be really foolish of us to ignore them. Take, for example, this email I received from a firefighter here in California. He says, fatality investigations for firefighters often include, we didn't think the fire was going to do that, even when all the available information was there to make safe decisions. This captain is going to use our findings on the optimism bias to try to explain to the firefighters why they think the way they do, to make them acutely aware of this very optimistic bias in humans. So, unrealistic optimism can lead to risky behavior, to financial collapse, to faulty planning. The British government, for example, has acknowledged that the optimism bias can make individuals more likely to underestimate the costs and durations of projects. So they have adjusted the 2012 Olympic budget for the optimism bias. My friend who's getting married in a few weeks has done the same for his wedding budget. And by the way, when I asked him about his own likelihood of divorce, he said he was quite sure it was 0%. So what we would really like to do is we would like to protect ourselves from the dangers of optimism, but at the same time remain hopeful, benefiting from the many fruits of optimism. And I believe there's a way for us to do that. The key here really is knowledge. We're not born with an innate understanding of our biases. These have to be identified by scientific investigation. But the good news is that becoming aware of the optimism bias does not shatter the illusion. It's like visual illusions, in which understanding them does not make them go away. And this is good because it means we should be able to strike a balance, to come up with plans and rules to protect ourselves from unrealistic optimism, but at the same time remain hopeful. I think this cartoon portrays it nicely, because if you're one of these pessimistic penguins up there who just does not believe they can fly, you will certainly never will. Because to make any kind of progress, we need to be able to imagine a different reality, and then we need to believe that that reality is possible. But if you are an extreme optimistic penguin who just jumps down blindly and hoping for the best, you might find yourself in a bit of a mess when you hit the ground. But if you're an optimistic penguin who believes they can fly, but then adjusts a parachute to your back, just in case things don't work out exactly as you planned, you will soar like an eagle. even if you're just a penguin. Thank you.
Great lecture, huh? That's one of my favorites. Allow me to ask, what do smokers do when they've been diagnosed with cancer related to smoking? They tell all their smoking friends to quit. Most safety people were people that got hurt at work. They're a living example of this biasness. They don't ever discuss it until it's too late. So that's going to be it for today. Think about that optimism bias. And there's a lot of other things that influence error as well. Environmental, things that are going on in your environment that you don't see, your perception. There's a lot of stuff happening that you don't see, and it can cause you to error. Okay, now with that out of the way, I'm on my own. I'll be getting more podcasts out. Right now, I'm at about 1,200 listeners, so the word's getting out. I thank each and every one of you for your support. United Safety Technologies has ventured into an online platform. We've started United Safety and Collective Research. This is a collective. This collective will provide a setting where safety professionals and business operators can become more familiar with user-centered safety systems. We'll provide the training and the materials to get everyone caught up in the new safety systems. Now, this training is not only for safety. You can use this information in any setting, from home with your kids to work with the sports team. The system we teach is engagement and social conformity. Also, if you'd like your questions answered on the show, please send me your questions at info@unitedsafetytechnologies.com. Please ask me in your question to ask this question on the air, and I'll do my best to answer your question as accurately as possible and according to the latest and the earliest science as well. So that's it for me. This has been kind of a long one. Sorry about that. Try not to do that. And thank you for listening, and you guys have a safe day. And think of yourself first in everything you do. Thank you.
For more information on how to reduce errors in your organization, go to www.unitedsafetytechnologies.com. If you are experiencing workplace injuries, vehicle accidents, and inefficiencies, then we can help. Thank you for listening, and always think of yourself first.